Hi, thanks for joining this session. So I'll be discussing the method section today. It's a very quick guide. I'll try to make it as short as possible, but it may take a few minutes, so bear with me. So why does the meta section matter at all? There are at least four reasons why the meta section is very important because it's the cornerstone of your paper. So we have discussed the introduction and the discussion. I skipped the method in the results section. So today I'll be focusing more on the method section of your manuscript. So the first reason why it matters is because it explains how the study was conducted. So this is a place where you tell a story of your study. In the introduction section, what you did was you spoke about the other people's studies and you outline your objectives and you promised to give us, more details about what you did. So this is your place, to explain how the study was conducted. The second reason is this is a section which is very much scrutinized by reviewers. So be it your supervisor or journal editor or reviewer or anyone who takes a look at your written material will scrutinize this section. So they don't start with the introduction, by the way. They may skim through the introduction, but in most cases, reviewers will want to scrutinize the method section of your manuscript. So that's why it matters a lot. So the amount of information and the clarity in the meta section also builds trust in your findings validity. So people will judge the validity of your findings based on the information that you provide in the meta section. And lastly, it enables replication by other researchers. So these are the four reasons, and we'll try to go into details of this section or in subsequent slides. So there are some core principles when writing methods section. So principle number one is the use of language. So you have to use the past tense and clear, concise language. So sometimes people copy some methods from their proposal and they keep it in the manuscript as is. So when the reader, the reviewer looks at it, it's in future tense. It shouldn't also be in present tense. So it's a past tense. You are telling a story. You are talking about what was completed already. So use a past tense and clear, concise language in the method section. Secondly, you have to organize it logically, either chronologically or by subsection. So you can't start, by describing the statistical method. You have to start by the setting. So I will come to that later, but there should be some chronology and some order in the way how you organize it. So it should be logically organized. And thirdly, um, you should provide enough detail for replication. And finally, you have to avoid including results or interpretations. So it's a major temptation. Some people just want to include as much details as possible in the method section, and then they end up describing either the results or discussions in the method section. So the method is a method. You just describe what you did in greater detail, and then that is it. So avoid, unnecessary presentation of results or interpretation in your method section. So how do you structure the method section? So this is a simplification of a very complex section, but depending on the journal requirements, there could be many varieties of this section, but the core structure is as follows. So you have a study design section where you specify the study type. You also talk about the setting of your study, and then you put a time frame. So these are critically important. I'll go into greater detail in each of these sub classifications of the study design. And then you have the participants, and they should be defined. And you have to also specify clearly if you had any inclusion or exclusion criteria. So that's another necessary component of the the method section. And the third part of the method section is providing details about the interventions, measurements, and tools, including outcomes. So for each of these, depending on the type of study, you will be required to provide some specific, fulfill some specific requirements, and there are often checklists that guide through this approach. And then if you have used some statistical analysis, it can also be a qualitative study, by the way, but you have to really describe the tests that you have used, what software you used, and the level of significance. These are the basic things that you need to provide. So let's come to the type of study, because I want to take a few more minutes here, because this is an area of confusion often. So how do you classify a study type? So the first point of classification is about the assignment of exposures. If whether the investigator assigned exposure or not is the initial step in classifying study types. So this is mostly for clinical studies, but it can also apply broadly to others. So if the investigator assigned exposures, then we are talking about experimental study. If no exposure was assigned by the investigator, then you are dealing with an observational study. Under the experimental study, there is another factor which determines the type of the study, which is a random allocation. If there is a random allocation of the interventions, then we are talking about a randomized controlled trial. If there was no random allocation, and then this is non-randomized controlled trial. Under the observational study, we have more classifications depending on a comparison group, for example. So if there is a comparison group, then you are talking about analytical study. If there was no comparison group, then this is a descriptive study. Under the analytical studies, there are further classifications depending on the of direction of the outcome and exposure. So if you have started with an exposure and went to determine the outcome, then this is a cohort study. And the cohort studies can also be subdivided into three: prospective, retrospective, and bidirectional. If you are starting with an outcome and going back in time to determine the exposure, then this is a case control study. And the last type of study here is a cross-sectional study where you determine exposure and outcome at the same time. So each of these study types have their own distinct features, some overlapping, but mostly these are distinct. So for anyone who is doing a clinical study especially, this is a very useful guide, and you can find more details in the Lancet manuscript mentioned here. So the other component of your manuscript then is the ethical considerations. So in the ethical consideration, many people, especially if they are not experienced, forget about the importance of getting ethical approval and protocol number. So manuscripts are now becoming more and more serious about this, the journals. So they have to state the IRB approval and protocol. Sometimes it requires multiple approvals, at global, national, subnational, and institutional level. So if you have such a documentation, then you can add more supplemental information. But it's very important to state the IRB approval, and most journals will reject unless you provide that. Confirmation of informed consent process is also crucially important, and addressing data confidentiality and ethical standards is part of the ethical considerations that needs to be stated in your method section. So when you come to ensuring reproducibility of your manuscript, there are three things that need to be explained. One is including precise details. What equipment did you use, and what models did you use, and what protocols did you follow? So this should be clear enough so that others can replicate what the study that you have conducted. The other is, the need to explain if you have done any randomization, blinding, and sample size calculations. These need to be provided in greater details. So there's always a temptation to skip some sample size calculations because people often don't like those numbers, but it's very important to determine, explain how you determine the sample size If it is a fixed sample size, then you should also be able to provide reasons why it was so fixed, and any power calculations should be provided so that it becomes very clear to future researchers. And then the referencing style should also follow standard guidelines. And, for some trials and also for all other study types, we have some standards, including the consort, for example, for trials, and strobe for others, and start. And there are many other types of standards that we follow when we write manuscripts. And usually the journals provide you some guidance on how to do, how to follow these guidelines. There are a few common mistakes that you need to be aware of and avoid them. And we have also some suggestions for solution. One very common mistake is, vague descriptions. You can just say that, data were collected. So this is what does it mean? Who collected it and how, and using what instrument? It should be very, very clear. And then including results or discussions. This is for the second time that I mentioned this. Very important, because we include results and discussion in the methods, and that's not the right approach. Ignoring journal guidelines. So journal guidelines are guidelines, and you have to follow them. And otherwise, they will not even proceed, your manuscript to a review stage. It can be rejected outright at the initial screening. So some of the solutions, you have to specify methods, of course, the way how you have, what method you have used. It's very clear, and you have to keep methods separate from outcomes. That's very important, and always tailor your method section to journals requirements. So a few practical tips. Number one, you have to, before you submit or even think of submitting your manuscript to a journal or writing your methods, you have to review journals' author guidelines for structure and limits. So after writing a 5,000 manuscript, you may be requested to downsize it to 2,500, and that is much more difficult than even writing the manuscript. So please review the journal's author guidelines for structure and limits. Use precise technical language and avoid jargons. So don't assume that everyone knows the jargon that you use in your clinical practice or in your public health work, whatever. So be really considerate of those limitations. You have to reference standard methods to save space. If some methods are already known, you don't have to repeat them. Don't have to, provide elaborate explanations about those. And also, there's a need to revise multiple times for clarity and conciseness. So revise, revise, revise. You don't have to, number all the versions that you revise internally by yourself, but it's very important to revise for clarity and conciseness. So in conclusion, the method section, you have to really structure it logically with clear subsections. Ensure that there is ethical transparency and it can be reproduced, and tailor to journal guidelines, and revise carefully.